What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Kevin Hoop Show, and today we are going over all of UFC 284. What an event it was, and what a night Saturday night was in general. Honestly, it was a really exciting night through the start to finish. I thought it was a lot of good fights, and honestly, I think there was a lot of things that are happening after this Saturday that, are going to tell the future of these two divisions. Not only did Islam Makhachev take the W, but so did Yair Rodriguez. He has now the interim championship belt at 145 pounds at featherweight. So that is going to be interesting to see what happens with Alexander Volkanovski and Yair Rodriguez at 145. That looks like it's the next fight that's going to happen, but honestly, who knows? We could see another Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski rematch. And hey, I would not be complaining because honestly, in my opinion, this is one of the most competitive, exciting, really close fights that we've seen in the past year, 2 years, 3 years. And I know I've been saying that a lot recently, but honestly, this fight, I was on the edge of my seat. My heart was racing more and more and more each round, to the point, I don't know if any of you guys watched the actual watch party we did on Saturday night. I was so hot in this room just because of my body temperature going up and my heart rate rising. I had to take off my shirt. I was shirtless on the watch party. I didn't give a fuck. And honestly, it was just a fun night overall. Now, not to mention, it was one of the best watch parties we've done so far. Shout out to all you guys that showed up there. We gained like 7 to 8 subscribers. I think it's actually at 9 subscribers now that we've gained just from that night. So to any of you new subscribers, what is going on? Welcome to the Kevin Hoop Show. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button, and I really appreciate it. Without further ado, though, let's go in and decipher what happened in these fights and kind of what's happening after these fights in these press conferences and see what we can get. So, starting off with the big one, obviously, we're going to start big here. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. Volk going up from 145, fighting at 155. Really didn't have to do too much of a weight cut. Obviously, Islam did have to do a weight cut because he walks around at fucking 200 pounds plus. Not actually, but he still walks around at a pretty heavy weight. He's just a big guy in general. And he talked about that actually in the press conference afterwards. He talked about how he had to do a weight cut. He had to travel here. Volk didn't have to do much traveling. He had to deal with the time change and all of that. So there was an adjustment that Islam Makhachev had to get used to and kind of adapt to. And I don't think a lot of people were really noticing that. And I think that it did affect him a little bit. I'm not saying that that was an excuse for him and why it was such a close fight. But I don't think that he was using that as an excuse either in the post-fight press conference. It was more or less just him saying, like, hey, I got touched up a little bit. I may have not been feeling as good as I should have been or as good as I felt in the Charles fight. So, there's other factors that are in this that weren't in that fight that he's now dealing with. Not to mention, this is the first time he's won all 5 rounds, which is kind of mind-blowing to hear. You're thinking everyone's seeing this guy so high. They're thinking he's unbeatable. He's impossible to beat. He's fucking the best of the best. And this is the first time we've actually seen him go all 5 rounds. Now, I'm sorry, I need to get a quick drink here real quick. But I do think that the fact that this is the first time we've seen Islam go all 5 rounds is pretty impressive. He looked pretty good going up against the pound for pound number 1 guy in the world in the UFC. And to go your first 5 rounds against the number 1 pound for pound guy is pretty fucking impressive. So hats off to Islam Makhachev. Not to mention, he won 3 or 4. I would say, in my opinion, he won 3 rounds. I thought Alex won 3 rounds, if I'm just going to be honest with you. But I rewatched the fight, and I do see how Islam won 3 rounds. But in my personal opinion, I just think that the fight was really close. I think it was a close fight in general. And in my opinion, it would be perfect, fucking perfect, if they did a rematch. Now, I think it would be just as big, if not bigger, but that's just me as a fan, honestly. But if you even go and look at other watch parties or other people that were watching the fight live, a lot of them were either had it for Volk or had it for Islam. In my opinion, a lot of people were on the edge of their seat when Bruce Buffer was, and still, I think everybody was on the edge of their seat for that exact moment, because whether you thought it was going to go to Volk or you thought it was going to go to Islam, it was just that good and that close of a fight. And in my opinion, from what I saw in my own comments and what I even saw on other people's social media, a lot of people thought that Islam Makhachev was going to ragdoll Alexander Volkanovski for 25 minutes. If not, he was going to finish him within the first 3-4 rounds. And that is not what happened. In my opinion, Volk won at least 2 rounds. And in my opinion, arguably won 3 rounds and could have won the fight. Now, I'm not saying Volk should have won the fight. I'm not saying it was a robbery. I'm just saying it was that close. And the fact that it was that close, to me, shows that Islam Makhachev is not as good, or was not as good, as people had thought he was. And in my opinion, I was saying it's going to be a close fight at least. At the least, it's going to be a close fight. And at the most, one of these guys might get caught at the end. I really didn't think this was going to be a first round, second round KO. Maybe in the third round, something could have happened, but honestly, I really thought it was going to be a close fight, and that's what we fucking got. And that's what I'm trying to always get in all of these really exciting fights. Because the closer the fight is, most likely the more entertaining it was. And that's just how I usually go off, kind of looking at fights and analyzing fights. How much were you really invested in it? How much were you on the edge of your seat when they were reading that decision? Did you really think it was going for the guy? How biased were you? And I will admit, I was biased towards Alexander Volkanovski. All of last week, all of the video before last week, I was definitely cheering for Volkanovski. I was more on that Volkanovski side. And, I'm still more of a fan of Volk than I am Islam. I just think that, I relate personally to Alexander Volkanovski more than I relate to Islam Makhachev. And there's nothing wrong with Islam Makhachev. I just relate to Alexander Volkanovski and respect him a lot. I respect Islam Makhachev just as much, maybe not as much, but very close, especially after winning a fight like that. His ground game and ground control is next level, and he's just very smart. And a thing I want to say of why he's smart on the ground is during that 4th round when he got back control and got the fish hooks in and, was trying to get the rear naked choke in on the ground, he got that body triangle around him and actually faced his foot. So if you have a body triangle in like this, he had this foot facing the cage. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the foot that was around the body was towards the cage, and that was the way that Alexander Volkanovski had to get out. That was the direction he had to go in, and he couldn't because Islam Makhachev put him in a position that was extremely hard to get out of. And not only did Alexander Volkanovski not get out of it, but he really didn't have an answer for it. Honestly, he threw in some punches that really weren't that, powerful. They didn't really, count on the scorecards that much. But I do think that Islam Makhachev held him down there for the rest of the round. And that's going out and showing, hey, I can hold you here as long as I want, and you can't do shit about it. And that right there is a statement. But on the other side of things, that was only the 4th round. The rest of the fight, every Islam Makhachev, every fucking time Islam Makhachev brought Alexander Volkanovski to the ground, that motherfucker stood right back up. And that is exactly what I said he was going to do. I'm not saying that I predicted the fight right. But what I'm saying is I was on point with my prediction on how Alexander Volkanovski was going to be in this fight. I think that he proved himself a lot with his grappling, and I think that in general he could have had a little bit more output. And that's just me looking at it from afar, but if we're going to go in to some statistics over here. Let me pull them up real quick. Just to go over the statistics on output, in my opinion, I think Islam Makhachev kind of died out by that 5th round. And whether it was because he was just tired or because he thought he had won the first 3 rounds or first 4 rounds, I do think that he was getting a little tired, in my opinion, from all the takedowns. And he did score a good amount of takedowns. He scored 4 out of 9 takedowns, and Alexander Volkanovski scored 0 out of 4. And I think that's the main reason why he lost. I don't have ground control time or anything, but obviously Islam Makhachev had way more ground time control or ground control time, more than Volk, obviously. But I do think that those takedowns just go to show that they are scoring takedowns somewhat for fighters now. And I'm just happy to see that. I'm very happy to see that. And I'll go into why I'm kind of, weary or just weird about what this whole ref decision and takedowns and scoring the fights. I think it's a little messy, and I'll just go into it right now. So Islam Makhachev had 95 total strikes. Alexander Volkanovski had 164 total strikes. Now, in the Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley fight and in the Paddy Pimblett versus Gordon Ryan fight, both of those fights, people thought that the other fighter had won and that it was somewhat of a robbery. It being Sean O'Malley won the fight, people thought Peter Yan won the fight. Same thing with, who else did I just say? Jared Gordon versus, I might have said Gordon Ryan earlier, I'm sorry. But the same thing happened with Paddy Pimblett, who won the fight, and Jared Gordon, who everybody thought got robbed and should have won the fight. Now, Paddy Pimblett and Sugar Sean O'Malley had more total strikes, and the other fighters, Jared Gordon and Peter Yan, had more takedowns. And with that, the people who had more total strikes won the fight. In this scenario with Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski, Islam Makhachev had more takedowns and less strikes and won the fight. So whether judges are starting to change their scoring or whether it was just some sort of weird scoring for this event, the person with the lower amount of total strikes in this fight won the fight. Now, again, I'm not taking anything from Islam Makhachev. Obviously, I don't have the ground control time statistic, which obviously I'm sure if I were to guess, it's probably close to 5 minutes of ground control for Islam and maybe 1 to 2 minutes for Volk. And, that's even if you're scoring that last takedown in the 5th round as a takedown. He was in Islam's guard, and that's not necessarily a takedown, but score it however you want to score it. I think Volkanovski had more of the positional control in that exchange, but that's just me. But I do think that also in the 4th round, when Islam Makhachev had the rear naked and had the back exposure on Alexander Volkanovski, all he was doing was holding a seatbelt grip around him and not really putting a submission in. He wasn't really threatening Alexander Volkanovski on the ground a whole lot in this fight. If anything, he took him down, threw some strikes, didn't really put Alexander Volkanovski in a lot of danger on the ground. There was no submission attempts. Maybe 1 or 2 here and there for a Kimura, but nothing really that was that threatening for Alexander Volkanovski. And to me, that goes to show that he didn't have the best positional control or ground control in general. Yes, he had, control and top control, but he wasn't doing anything from that top control. So, in my opinion, it just, should the official or ref stood them up in the 4th round? I don't know. If you go off of every other single fight that happens in the UFC, that fight is going to get stood up. I don't know why they didn't, but at the same time, as a jiu-jitsu person, as someone who's a fan of grappling, if that person who has that person's back can hold him there on the ground, in my opinion, they shouldn't stand him up. And I think that that's, hats off to Islam Makhachev. He held him on the ground and did not let him stand up. He could not get up, and that is what I think really at the end of the day lost Alexander Volkanovski the fight. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is why Islam Makhachev is the champ. That's why he's so good, and that's what he does. So hats off to Islam Makhachev in that aspect. Now, to kind of talk about what they've talked about after the press conference, Islam said that Volk is very strong. Islam Makhachev talked about how everybody in this fight game always crumbles after they feel his power. After they feel Islam's power, they give up. After he takes him down and they feel his pressure, they give up. Now, obviously, Volk didn't do that, but Islam Makhachev even said, oh, you're small, you're coming up, you're not going to be strong, blah, 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 blah. And Islam Makhachev said in the press conference he felt his strength. He felt how strong Alexander Volkanovski really is, and he's fucking strong. He felt that shit. He also talked about how he said move when he was going for the rear naked. He said that, there was a lot of shit talk in that fourth round when Islam had that back exposure and was going for the rear naked and had that seatbelt grip on him. And Alexander Volkanovski was talking a lot of shit. He said, you're not doing anything. You said you were going to hold me here for 15 seconds and take me out, and you're not. And Islam Makhachev answered back, move, get up, try and get up, I dare you, you can't. And I think that goes to show how strong and powerful Islam Makhachev is. He does have a good ground game. He does have that strength on the ground. And whether people have an answer for that, we're going to have to see in this 155-pound division. He said to Dana to call him. He obviously doesn't really dictate who he's going to fight next. He's trying to just say that, hey, I'm not calling out anybody. Every time I go into a fight, Dana White or the UFC gives me the number one contender. So he's just going to be looking for the next guy up in the line, I guess I should say. Which, honestly, in my opinion, it could be a lot of different people. It could be Beneil Dariush. It could be another Charles Oliveira fight if Charles Oliveira wins against Beneil Dariush. There's a lot of speculation on whether this Beneil Dariush versus Charles Oliveira fight is going to happen. Now, obviously, we saw how it went with Charles Oliveira the first time. And in my opinion, I think we could have seen a better fight. I think Charles Oliveira kind of underperformed in that, as well as, kind of saying Alexander Volkanovski did too. But that just goes to show how good Islam Makhachev is. And in my opinion, Beneil Dariush can, he's looked really good on the ground. I'm not saying he's going to give Islam Makhachev the biggest, ground game back and forth. But I do think Beneil Dariush can go up against Islam Makhachev and have an answer for some of the things on the ground that other people do not have an answer for. So whether we see that or not, who knows? Khabib actually FaceTimed Islam Makhachev and was like, you should have done this, this, and this. I don't know why you did this, but you should have done this. And, I think that was just a little funny. We did see this is the first time Islam Makhachev has fought without Khabib in his corner, or at least without a Nurmagomedov in his corner. Obviously, Islam being coached by Khabib's dad beforehand, and then being coached by Khabib for the Charles fight, I think went to show how good and how well Islam fights with Khabib in his corner. And I think, whether Khabib comes back for the next Islam fight, who knows? But I think it's exciting and fun to see that Khabib's still watching and still in the game at least a little bit and keeping up with the UFC and what happens. Granted, I was expecting that to happen. Islam Makhachev is his boy, so I don't see why he wouldn't be keeping up with this fight. Now, I already mentioned that part. Was fine against Volk taking him top control on the fifth in the fifth round. He said that he thought he won the first four rounds, and when Volk kind of got that takedown or got that top control in the fifth round, he said that's perfectly fine with me. I already won the fight. If I just ride out the rest of this fight on the ground and guard, I'm gonna win. And honestly, that was a good game plan. If you go out and look at Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, they went against that game plan and they got caught for it. And Islam Makhachev could have got caught by Alexander Volkanovski in that fifth round. So you have to, once again, you got to tip Islam Makhachev. As much as it might hurt me to go against Volk, you have to give the respect to Islam Makhachev for being a smart fighter in that 5th round. You've seen a lot of fighters make the wrong decision and try and stand up with guys. When they think they won, they still stand up. And honestly, that is really smart for Islam Makhachev to notice that other fighters are making that mistake, and he's not going to do that. He's not going to put himself in a place where he has risk when he doesn't have to. And that was, I think, super smart from Islam Makhachev. And just again, hats off and much respect. I already talked about how that was his first 5-round fight, blah, 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 blah. Will look better after this. So if this was the first time Islam Makhachev went 5 rounds, in my opinion, that can only mean better things for him. We're seeing this dude in his infancy. Maybe not the infancy stage, but we'll still have to see him in another 5-round fight. And in my opinion, he's only going to look way better than he did in this fight. He now has a whole 25 minutes of footage to go back and look at. Okay, in this situation, I did this, this, and this wrong. In this situation, I did this, this, and this right. More of this, less of that. And those sort of things is what makes a fighter a whole jump and whole leaps better in their next fight. So I think that we're going to see a really improved Islam Makhachev in the next fight, just for the fact that this was the first time we've seen him go 5 rounds. Not only the things in the fight, but also just his cardio in general. His strategy in general, I think he can, make better and better and better for these next title defenses at 155. And who knows? Maybe he goes up to welterweight at 170 and we see Conor McGregor versus Islam Makhachev. The possibilities are endless for this dude now. He talked about he never chooses his opponents. It's always the UFC that brings the fights to him, which I think is perfectly fine. This dude shouldn't be going out and calling out people. He doesn't have to. Granted, I do think if he did call out people, it would be a little bit more entertaining. It would have a little bit more hype for it. But I think Islam Makhachev is kind of trying to create this persona that he's the baddest motherfucker on the UFC roster. And that in general, that alone creates fear for these other fighters. And I think that Alexander Volkanovski dealt with that a lot better than Charles Oliveira did. Just look at the difference in the outcome of these fights. I think Charles Oliveira feared Islam Makhachev. And Alexander Volkanovski did not fear Islam Makhachev. He took on the challenge. He stepped up to the occasion. He had a strong mental game against Islam Makhachev and didn't let the fear get into his head. And I think that reason alone is why we saw such a good fight with Alexander Volkanovski. And also, another thing that he was mentioning and talking about was how Islam Makhachev in the post-fight press conference said that Volk is a real champion. Volk has that mentality and fights like a real champion. He doesn't give up. He keeps on fighting. He brings the fight to you. And Islam Makhachev saw that. And honestly, that gives me some more points on the Islam Makhachev side of liking him a little bit more. I'm not saying I didn't like Islam Makhachev before this. I was just more of a fan of Volk. And I still am, I'm not going to lie. But this makes me more of a fan of Islam Makhachev in general. For me, it's how you react after the fight that defines what type of fighter you are. And not only did Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski deal with that really well, but they both dealt with it in the same sort of way of giving that respect to the other fighter and saying, yeah, this was a hard fight. I will admit it. And he said that. He said, Islam Makhachev said, Alexander Volkanovski is strong. He is a real champion. He gave that respect over to the opponent. And to me, that is what someone needs to do if it was that close of a fight. And that is what he did. And shout out to Islam Makhachev for doing that. And it's not like he needed me to give him respect, honestly. He's not worried about fucking a YouTube channel with 77, almost 80 subscribers giving him respect. So shout out to Islam Makhachev, though. Now going over to the other side in the post-fight press conference, let's talk about what Volkanovski was talking about. He thinks that in general, he could have done more. And in my opinion, with the striking output that he had, it's hard to say that he could have done more. Honestly, if you just look at it, it's hard to say that. In the positions that he was in, it was hard for that. Hard for him to get out, especially in that 4th round. But he also talked about how there were certain situations where he thought he could have capitalized in the position a little bit more. And he himself even talked about the fear, the respect, and the things that people say about Islam Makhachev, about how strong and how much pressure that he has in the clinch. And Alexander Volkanovski in certain situations said, "Oh, this dude's not that strong. This dude, he was double guessing himself, in my opinion." And he said that in the post-fight press conference. He said, "I double guessed myself," and he shouldn't have. But I think that in that fight scenario, he went left when he should have went right. He went for holding a position instead of trying to capitalize and get a takedown from that position. And that just goes to show how good Islam Makhachev is and how good people thought he was. And that's not saying that he isn't still good. He's very good and still is very good. But I think, again, that fear aspect of fighters thinking that and just having that initial thought before you even fight him that he's so good, that he's going to do so many good things in this fight when you haven't even fought him yet. And it's almost, losing or tapping out before the actual fight even happens. And I think that Alexander Volkanovski kind of was surprised in certain situations where, he doesn't have as much strength here. And he was so used to training in a certain fashion and, reacting a certain way, where he didn't react the other way that he should have and capitalized on that position where he didn't have as much strength as he thought Islam was going to have. So I think that's a big aspect in why Volk didn't win this fight. But again, I think it's also, you have to give that respect to Islam Makhachev because Islam Makhachev was that good in holding him in certain positions. Woo! Thought Islam was going to be stronger. I talked about that. Said he underestimated his striking. Another thing that I think that Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev kind of had a game plan before this, obviously, but I think that Islam Makhachev was focusing on his striking because Volk was such a good striker, and I think Volk was focusing on his grappling because Islam Makhachev was such a good grappler. And when fighters do that in general, I think that in their background style of whatever that is, it being striking for Volk and grappling for Islam, both of those things in those fighters' styles was lacking a little bit or not as good as it should have been compared to the other fights. And I think that that is a very good thing that Volk said. He said maybe not so much of Islam underestimating Volk's striking. I think that, Volk had good striking and definitely showed up in his striking game and, definitely underestimated Islam a little bit. I think that Islam landed some good strikes, but I do think that at the end of the day, Islam definitely underestimated Alexander Volkanovski's ground game, and that showed. Not only did Volkanovski get taken down multiple times, but he stood back up, which goes to show a whole bunch. I called it a lot. I said it so much leading up into this fight, saying that if Alexander Volkanovski gets taken down and stands back up, it's going to be a mindfuck for Islam Makhachev. And to be honest, I was a little wrong. I was a little wrong that it wasn't a complete mindfuck, but I do think it surprised Islam Makhachev a little bit. Like, oh, he got up from this. I can't just stay here the whole entire round. And with that, Islam Makhachev didn't really have an answer on the feet as much. I think he had somewhat of an answer, but obviously he got outstruck on the feet. And, whether he underestimated Volk on the ground or not, I think that it went to show that he underestimated him at least a little bit. And as for the striking and Volk underestimating Islam's striking, I think that went to show as well. I think Volk got caught a lot more times than he thought he was going to get caught. He had a big cut over his right eye, because I was looking at it, or it might have been his left eye. It was his left eye, because if you're looking at it this way, it's his left eye. He got a cut over his left eye, and as well as he got caught and dropped to his knee one part in the fight. I forget which round it was, but he did drop down to his knee after he got caught with a left hook from Islam Makhachev, which honestly to me was pretty impressive from Islam Makhachev. Like, he had good striking against a really good striker in Alexander Volkanovski. So again, hats off to Islam. I think in general, though, he proved a lot of people wrong. Honestly, I've talked about it a lot. I'm going to keep on talking about it. Alexander Volkanovski was underestimated and the underdog in this fight. A lot of people said he was going to get ragdolled around the ring. And in my opinion, he did not get ragdolled around the ring. He got held for one round, for half the round. And honestly, when he was getting held down there, it wasn't for a whole long, or it wasn't for a threatening time period. He wasn't getting threatening, or it wasn't dangerous when he was getting grappled on the ground. So just for that fact, I think that Alexander Volkanovski's stock is going to go up from this. I do think that, he was really down and hard on himself, which I think any fighter is going to be if they lose a fight like this. But I do think that his stock and, his reputation is going to go up from this. He just went up against the guy that everybody thought was unstoppable and did pretty good. In my opinion, he took at least 2 rounds. You could argue for the 3rd round, but obviously Islam Makhachev comes out on top. Moving on, though, to the other fights that happened on this card. It was an overall really good card. It started off a little slow with Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menifield. And I didn't really know too much about Alonzo, but I knew somewhat about Jimmy Crute. And Jimmy Crute was fighting in his home country, home country of Australia. And in my opinion, I had Jimmy Crute winning. But it went to a tie, and I think that it was a little surprising, not too surprising, honestly. But I did think that Jimmy Crute had really good grappling, and Alonzo didn't really have that much of an answer to his grappling game. And, we saw a tie happen, and honestly, Alonzo did have really good striking on the feet, so I can see why it went to a tie. I just thought with the grappling, though, on the ground, that Jimmy Crute showed enough on the ground that he should have won the fight. But it is what it is. At least, if these two fighters are looking at it, they didn't get an L on in the L column, so it could have been a lot worse for these two. And honestly, it was a somewhat decent fight to start off the fight, but Justin Tafa versus Parker Porter, just looking at these guys, you knew it was going to be a back and forth on the feet. These guys are big guys in the heavyweight division, and, they're not the most shredded fighters in the division. They've got a little bit of, they're husky, all right? They've got a little tummy, all right? And that's perfectly fine. You can have a little tummy in the UFC as long as you've got cardio and power. And what's his name? Justin Tafa had that fucking power. Justin Tafa came out in the first round, guns a-blazing, caught Parker Porter with a left or right hand and ended up dropping him pretty fucking fast in the first round. And that, to me, was what got this whole card started. That was like, woo! We've got a good fight on our hands, and not only a good fight, but we've got a good fucking card. It was like a little reminder. And that's what I kind of like about these early fights before the main event. A lot of the main event gets obviously a lot of the attention, but a lot of these prelims and early fights that happen in the main card kind of get the main event started. And it reminds you that, hey, we've got other fights than just this main event to look out for and that are exciting. That's why we watch this sport, ladies and gentlemen, because anything can happen, and usually shit fucking goes down in these fights, whether it's a decision or a first round knockout. Exciting things happen. And that was an exciting thing that I think got the card started, in my opinion. We should do a count or something of how many times I say it, in my opinion, in this video. I got to work on that. Moving on, though, to a fan favorite, especially for you Australians out there. The fucking crowd was roaring for this fight. Jack Della Madalina versus Randy Brown. You saw it in the press conference leading up to it. Jack Della Madalina, I'm just going to call him Madalina because that name is just a butchering, and I feel bad for him whenever I fucking say that name. But Madalina had the crowd bumping in the arena, and he barely even had to say anything. And everybody in that arena was booing for Randy Brown. And I kind of, had my money on Randy Brown a little bit just for that underdog mentality of everybody, at least in the stadium, going up against you. And I was completely wrong with that. I was not. I couldn't have been further off from that prediction. Granted, that prediction might have been off a little bit of vodka and a little bit of the papaya, but Madalina showed up in the first round, I believe, and came out with another knockout, which was really exciting to see. I wasn't expecting to see a knockout that soon. If anything, I was expecting a knockout to happen in the second or third round in this fight. I thought they were going to feel each other out a little bit for the first round, but again, completely off with the predictions for this fight. And honestly, my predictions were a little all over the place for this fight. But I also, again, was a big fan of Volk, and that's who my prediction went to. But I just as well was really debating of, is Islam Makhachev going to be that guy again? And once again, he was that fucking guy, just like Madalina was that fucking guy knocking out Randy Brown in the first fucking round. And again, just it was a great fight to see and get it started, get the fight rolling. And just to go off that first round knockout was just really exciting to see off of the Justin Tafa fight. Just having two knockouts being the first round back to back is always something exciting. And it's always fun to watch. That's why I watch this fucking great and amazing sport of mixed martial arts, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to the co-main event. And honestly, I think this one was getting slept on a little bit. Granted, Alexander Volkanovski is the champ at 145 pounds, and I didn't really understand the whole thought process of why the interim belt was pulled out for this, just because the fact that it's basically a number one contender fight, because the winner of this fight basically gets a guaranteed fight with Alexander Volkanovski for the 145-pound undisputed belt. But, you know, I do kind of understand why they brought out the interim belt. If Alexander Volkanovski went out and won the 155-pound belt, you know, there could have easily been a rematch or something, and then the 145-pound division would have been held up for a long time. So, ooh, little tooting over here. But wow. I understand and I don't understand at the same time why they brought out the interim continental, or not interim continental. Jeez, the interim belt, it might be interim continental. I could be wrong. But I know it is the interim belt in general for 145. And Yair Rodriguez came out pretty hot. He showed, honestly, a very diverse mixed martial arts game. Not only did he show great taekwondo, but he showed really good grappling as well. He was hitting a lot of strikes from the guard position or just from his back in general when Josh Emmett was trying to get on top. And that to me was showing that, all right, this dude's not only really good on the feet, but he's really dangerous on the ground as well. He was putting Josh Emmett in triangle situations and other situations where he could have got a knockout or just a reversal from a really good strike from off his back. And I think that alone is something that you don't see every day. And not to mention that Taekwondo is a really good counter to Muay Thai, and that's kind of where Josh Emmett kind of lies in his style. And as well as a lot of mixed martial artist fighters that you kind of see him either go with Muay Thai or Taekwondo or more of a grappling game, obviously. But more on the feet, you usually see a kickboxing style or Muay Thai style. And you don't really see that Taekwondo style a lot. And he was showing a lot of Taekwondo techniques. And that, I think, went to show of how diverse he is. He was throwing strikes with his hands. He was throwing high and low kicks. He was hitting the calf, the body, the head, and just, you know, really being as the most diverse fighter you could possibly be as a mixed martial arts fighter. He was on the ground. He was using his kicks. He was using his fists. What more could you ask of a fighter to use in his tool belt? He was using every single tool a mixed martial artist could possibly use. Not to mention, he was throwing spinning back elbows. Not spinning back, but spinning elbows, which I thought was awesome to see. Josh Emmett, on the other hand, was just, I think, really was a lot smaller than Yair Rodriguez. You really saw the size discrepancy in this fight. And not to mention, when Josh Emmett was walking out, In my opinion, I thought, you could see his rib cage really easily and kind of in an unhealthy manner and way. Now, whether that was just his regular weight cut or how he regularly looked at that weight, I thought it was a little low, but whether that had anything to do with how he felt in the ring or not, I don't know. But I do think that Yair Rodriguez just looked like the better overall fighter. And that goes to show, and obviously who won this with a second-round knockout from Yair Rodriguez. So hats off to Yair Rodriguez, and congratulations for winning the interim belt at 145 and getting that Alexander Volkanovski fight for the undisputed belt if it actually happens. I don't know what fight, I don't know who the fighter is that's facing Max Holloway, but the guy Joe on Alexander Volkanovski's team was actually talking about how the fight with Max Holloway and the fighter that's fighting Max Holloway, and I'm sorry that I don't remember his name, but that fight could also be a number one contender for the undisputed belt with Alexander Volkanovski, just for the fact that a win over Max Holloway is kind of more impressive than a win over Josh Emmett, only being a number 5 ranked person in this division. So whether we see Yair Rodriguez next or the winner of Max Holloway and the other fighter fighting him, or maybe he already won, I'm not exactly 100% sure on that. You'll have to double check me and let me know in the comments, but congratulations to everyone that fought on this card. They brought a very exciting UFC 284, and we've got another exciting fight just coming around the corner this February 18th on Saturday. We've got Jessica Andrade going up against Blanchfield. It's going to be, I think, for a number one contender spot for their fighting for that belt. I'm not sure on the weight division, but we'll have some more on that later this week. So tune in for that. Let me know who you guys thought was the best fight in this UFC 284 card. Let me know who you think was the better fighter versus Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. Whether you thought it was a good decision or not, let me know in the comments. If you guys are new here, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. And I will see you guys later this week. We've got videos coming out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We've got the Eagles game today. When I'm recording this, it's Sunday. It's the Super Bowl. Hopefully, I'm repping the Super Bowl hat from 2018, 2017 from the Eagles. I know many of you guys might not be Eagles fans, but if you are, say Philly, Philly. Say go Birds in the comments. Let me know. If you're from Philly, hit that subscribe button because I bleed fucking green. Go Birds! Woo! Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Boom.